Hiya crafters, Amy here with Amy's Wares, and today I'm going to show you some watercoloring with your stencils. Now I have two panels of Arteza watercolor cardstock, and I also have two brand new stencils from A Colorful Life Designs. This is Trailing Vines and Outline Flowers. Now these are just two of many gorgeous new stencils, as well as a new stamp, which you'll see featured here in a little bit. But I did use pixie spray on both of these stencils, and I'm going to use my Magello Mission Gold watercolor paints. But you can use obviously whatever watercolor paints you have in your crafty stash. Even the little cheapy 99-cent Crayola ones will work for this process. So the key is really going to be a liberal coating of the pixie spray on the back of your stencils to help it hold down on that watercolor paper. Now here are a couple photos of the finished cards to show you where we're going, but I did use the textured side of the watercolor paper just because I prefer that. I think it's visually interesting and I like the texture that it gives to the finished card. So here I'm just lining up this Trailing Vine stencil and pressing it down really well with my brayer. That's going to allow the temporary fixative, the pixie spray, to just really grab on to the paper, which you want because, you know, it will kind of bow up once you introduce water. So I'm going to start with these green colors. I have this really pretty teal, and I'm just using my little mason jar of water just to get it the thickness that I want it. And you can see I'm doing this super quickly. It's really such an easy technique, and you'd be surprised how well it works. Now, this wouldn't work on regular cardstock. It wouldn't be able to handle the water. So make sure that you're using some sort of watercolor paper for this technique. And then once you just give it a minute, you don't even need to let it fully dry. It will really suck in that water and the watercolor, and it will keep the design as intended. So it's always surprising how well this works. You might even be able to do it technically without pixie spray, but I can't guarantee the results would be as crisp because once that watercolor paper starts bowing, then it could really allow it to get underneath the stencil. So in my opinion, the best way to do it is with the pixie spray, but by all means, if you don't have it, go ahead and give it a try, seeing if it'll work without it. So now I'm just going to carefully lift this up. I did try and dab up some little extra pools of watercolor that may have been sitting on top of the stencil, but as you can see here, take your time and it will reveal your gorgeous design from your stencil. So this is always kind of a wow feeling whenever I remove the stencil. I'm always surprised at how well it works, but that's why it's one of my favorite techniques. I just think it's so fun. So now I'm moving on to this Outline Flowers and doing the same thing, pushing the brayer down. And I'm kind of lazy here. I'm just using my little water brush pen just to kind of squirt some water into the wells of the colors that I want to use. And I'm going to go warm on this one. So I have some really pretty fuchsias and purples. I do end up bringing in a little bit of blue, but I wanted to do kind of a nice contrast with a warmer sort of color selection on this one. And I'm just kind of following the center of the blooms. To start, you could go, diagonally in just strips of color. That would be pretty too, but just kind of cleaning off my brush and moving on to this purple color and going around the outer edges. And again, I'm just letting the watercolor do its thing. So if you like messy, sloppy watercolor and unpredictability, then this is for you. If you don't and you're a bit of a control freak, then maybe watercolor isn't for you. But I think it's beautiful. I love when the watercolor does its own thing. And you can see I even kind of missed some spots, but I wasn't too worried about it. I was noticing it was really starting to bow up on the sides, and I didn't want it to creep under the stencil. I was a little nervous that it may have been a little bit messed up on the edges. But again, it surprised me. Once I pulled it back, it stayed pretty true to the design and didn't really get any oozage under the stencil. So now I'm just kind of filling in little gaps as I see them and kind of sopping up extra big pools of water with my brush. And then I'm going to do the same thing and just kind of carefully pull this back to reveal the gorgeous design. Now, watercolor is always best when you let it sit and air dry. I did end up using my heat tool just to kind of speed it along because I was being impatient. But watercolor, in my opinion, is usually the prettiest when you let it be and let it dry. naturally. So here is the gorgeous new stamp set. It is called Happy. You can see it's got the 3 bigger scripty sentiments and then a bunch of little smaller sub-sentiments, which you can kind of mix and match. So this was really fun. I got to help Mary Kay kind of pick out some ideas for this stamp set, and it's very versatile. So it's obviously got Easter, but it also has birthday and crafting and other sort of sentiments that you can use year-round. So this is a nice versatile little stamp set that will not only go with all of these stencils from the release, but will work for year-round usage. And I did pick a couple of Catherine Pooler colors that I felt worked and matched really well with the watercolor paints. And I'm just stamping those 2 big sentiments first, and then I'm going to come back with a couple of the little sub-sentiments to finish for the front of my cards, and I'm just going to stamp those with my favorite black ink. It is VersaFine Claire Nocturne, and just really good for little tiny detailed word stamps like this. It is a pigment, so you want to give it a minute to dry because it's not going to soak into the paper like a dye would. And I am just stamping on 110-pound cardstock, and I will kind of stamp this a couple times just to make sure it's a nice even impression. You don't want to press down too hard on your Misty door because then you could splay the letters and kind of mess it up a little bit. So here I'm just fussy cutting out the congrats with my favorite little fussy cutting scissors, and this is a way to kind of give it the look of a faux shadow layer without actually having a faux shadow layer. So I'm going to use that, and then I have these sentiment strip dies from Honeybee. I'm not sure if they're still available, but if they are, I will link them in the video description box with all the other items that I used. But I'm going to run that off screen through my die cutting machine, and then I decide to bring in this oval stitched die as well to cut out the Happy. So I do kind of reconfigure my direction. I wasn't sure entirely how I was going to put all these little pieces together, but at this point I realized I had all that white space on the little oval, so I decided to just grab my stamp block and actually stamp the birthday down directly on that little oval because there was all that white space. So it fit nicely in there, and it was a nice way to kind of take up that space. So here's the panels all dried. Like I said, I did use my heat tool to kind of speed it along, but I'm going to use some tear tape here, or what else do you call this? Score tape. And I chose this because watercolor paper not only is quite thick, but it tends to warp a little bit. So I liberally coat the edges and then the center with this score tape because I really want to make sure it holds down well onto the card base. And this is going to cover the entire front of the card base. Part of the reason I did that is because watercolor paper tends to be a little bit creamier in color. It's a little bit more beige. So I didn't want the contrast of the white border or the bright white cardstock. So this will cover the entire card front. And I am just pulling half off of the strips because that will allow me to kind of course correct if I put it on there kind of wonky. So I'm just pulling them off now that I have it lined up well, and I'm just going to press it down really well. And here are the finished cards. You can see the direction I decided to go. I ended up doing a black cardstock of that same oval with the strip, and I have it popped up with some little foam strips that I get from Amazon, and I added some blingage, but overall very simple design. So the star of the show is obviously the technique of using your watercolor with your stencils, and I hope you'll give it a try because it's one of my favorites. So thanks for spending time with me today. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.